So I'm really delighted to welcome into conversation two very inspiring trailblazers in the sector, Manu and Naftal, who will be speaking to environmental justice through the lens of activism and change-making. Manu Maunganidze is co-director of Inclusion and Climate Justice at SOS-UK. He's founder of Nature Youth Connection in Education, and he's lead at the Global Goals Centre as Education and Community Engagement and director at Bristol Green Capital Partnership. As part of his work with SOS UK, Manu is one of the people behind the RACE report, which is Radical Action for the Climate Emergency, looking at charities and funders working on environmental and conservation issues and highlighting the need for greater representation within the environmental sector. The RACE report shows the racial diversity gap between the UK working population and staff within the sector. And it's through this work that we became first introduced. Naftal Zinyemba is an EDI officer for the Wildlife Trusts. At university, he studied BA Theology and went on to complete an MA in Theology. During his time at university, Naftal discovered a passion for social justice and developed a deep understanding of issues such as racism, ableism, colonialism, feminism, and queer studies. Through his studies, he recognised the importance of social justice and the need to challenge oppressive systems that create barriers in people's lives. He's part of a team committed to ensuring that everyone has access to nature and works to remove as many barriers as possible so that people can enjoy nature in their own way. So a huge warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us on this call. I think it would be first really helpful for the audience for you to introduce yourselves in terms of your journey to where you are now. So shall I start with you, Manu?
Sure, thank you, Ria. Yeah, I turned 40 last year, so it's been a long journey for sure. I'll speak to what's possibly relevant for this. I'm an immigrant to this country. I came for a better opportunity. I went to university here and in the wonderful, great city of Birmingham. And I think I went to study politics and philosophy because I felt like the world around me didn't make sense. And I was kind of enthused, but also disgusted by things that were going on in the Arab world and also in my home country of Zimbabwe at the time, early 2000s. And that's what led me into studying that. And then coming out of it, you don't really get a job once you've studied politics and philosophy. You kind of sign up for a welfare check, I think, on some level, or you become an academic, which didn't seem very relevant to me. And I went on to become a teacher. And I think when I was teaching is when I realized the extent of inequality here, because you sort of move as an immigrant to a place because you think it's going to be better for you, and economically, yeah, it is. And then you're suddenly working with students who are coming from homes where they haven't had heating on for a couple of months, and where 40%, 45% on free school meals. And you start to connect the dots. Who are those kids? What sort of homes are they coming from? What sort of backgrounds are they coming from? And we're going to go into this a little bit, but you realize that they're already standing on the back foot in life, and that class, gender, race, origin, all of those things are intersecting to create a situation where they're going to have to just fight that much harder. And nature being a thing that was important to me, and the environment in general being something that I was passionate about, trying to get the young kids that were coming from those low-income backgrounds interested in the environment seemed completely ridiculous. It seemed ridiculous to the young kids. It seemed ridiculous to their parents. It seemed ridiculous to my colleagues. And I started to ask why that was. And I started to look at the environmental sector as a professional space, started to look at the sort of people I was surrounded by when I decided to go to the mountains or the beach, and that's when I started to see where there were discrepancies, right, in who lived here, but who had access to those places, who had access to those jobs. And so my shift into creating nature youth connection and education was initially to give basic access to what I thought was a wealth and health giving natural environment to young kids. And that led to, the race report, which Jamie at SOS kindly said, we can house this, bring this into our space, because we've been looking at the same problems and looking at how students are left out of certain spaces. And, and then the problem was always, how do you get funding for something like that? It doesn't really seem to be something that anybody's thinking about. And we are 4 years into that report now, and Nature Youth Connection Education is still running. And, what impact we've had is for everybody else to tell, but I feel like we've at least opened the conversation, and that's just creaking the door open at the moment, and hopefully it's a wider door that allows many more people to be able to enter.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Manu. Naftal.
Good morning, everyone. Fun fact, me and Manu come from the same place. We're both Zimbabwean. Yeah, so my story is actually kind of similar to Manu, because I studied theology, which is pretty much got a little bit hint of philosophy in it as well. So when I did finish, I was like, I didn't know what to do. I was thinking at the teacher route, because that's where some of my friends went into. I was looking at pastoral work, but I was thinking that's not really fitting into the skill sets that I've been building up during my time at university. So I was working, I've done a lot of jobs. I've worked with palliative care, I've supported elderly people, I've supported young people within my work as well, within my church work as well. But mostly what I recognized when I was doing all of this is I've really, really wanted to get into EDI work. But if you know about getting into the EDI space, it's very, very difficult to get into some work. So when I finished uni in 2000 and was it 2001? Yeah, I was looking. I couldn't find anything. And then I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna leave it to fate. And lo and behold, a space came out in the Wildlife Trust. I was like, I remember talking to my dad. My dad's like, "Are you gonna apply for it?" I was like, "Yeah, but it's the environmental sector. I'm not really sure." Blah, but my dad was just like, "Well, if you don't do it, then you will never find out." So I went into my interview just ready to just say what I needed to say and do what I need to do, because this is genuinely something I'm passionate about. And I'm glad that they saw through my passion. And then I got offered a job. And I never thought, if you had asked me 3 years ago whether I would be here, I'll probably say no. But I'm very lucky because I've been in a space that has allowed me to grow. If I wasn't working for the Wildlife Trust, I wouldn't be here right now speaking at Renew, speaking about social justice, speaking about all these things that I'm very passionate about. So yeah, I'm just very grateful for my journey. And I've learned a lot. I've met Manu more times than I thought I would ever meet him. So yeah, I'm just very grateful to be here and just to share some of the stuff on activism and change making with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we are so lucky to have you both in the space. And I think for both of you, your passion and enthusiasm and care really shines through. I think also you've both been very integrated within communities. And like me, also coming as an immigrant from Africa, you do have this additional perspective. It's not just seeing the interlocking layers of oppression from the outside, you're actually in it. And so, it becomes very much a personal story and a personal journey as much as it is, a space that you're moving into. So I think one of the first things that I wanted to touch on was, what does activism mean for you in the personal and professional spaces that you occupy?
Am I going first, Ria?
And anyone can speak.
All right, great. Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think activism has a very ambiguous definition, and you go from outright protest and rage and people that are really feeling like the world is not for them, and very quiet activism. Somebody sitting up in their bedroom drawing a piece of art that's demanding a different world. So I always get, I think it was Angela Davis, and the thinker, political theorist, big hero of mine. And, she said something like, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. I think that's where that's the starting point for me. If you are finding yourself in a situation where consistently and persistently you are not feeling either welcome or empowered, either you have to shift away from that space because it's toxic to your own growth, or you look inside and look around you and say, do I have the tools to do something about it, right? And I think activism really begins where acceptance ends, is what Angela Davis is saying to us. And I feel like on some level I've had both sides of the coin. I've had a fairly privileged upbringing. Not everybody from where I'm from gets to go to a Russell Group university and study a job without a degree without a job at the end of it. But on the other side of it, I am very conscious of the fact that that comes with a lot of responsibility, that on the face of it and internally, I am also representing people that would never have that opportunity. And so what am I willing to accept in this world? I'm willing to accept justice. I'm willing to accept love. I'm willing to accept peace. I'm willing to accept a natural environment that is being safeguarded by the people around it. And many of the opposites of those things are things I'm not willing to accept. And that's where my activism begins.
Yeah. And I think something that I just wanted to highlight is there's a lot of weight on our shoulders, right? And I think that that's something that isn't always recognized. But, even when I was just reading out your short biogs, and hearing you speak and knowing, how invested we all are, like this is a very all-encompassing journey, and it demands so much of us. The environmentalist movement's been historically driven by white non-working class people, and I know that's something that you're trying to tackle by highlighting this issue of representation. So where does it come in? Have you noticed any change? Has there been any kind of shift in dialogue since starting the race report?
I think we often lean on data as something that is going to allow us to move forward, right? We always say, know the problem first, and then you can do something about it. And I think when we're setting off with the race report, we realized that the data was patchy and often inaccurate and often represented certain subsections of the environment sector, which actually allowed people to not take accountability for any type of change. We chose race because it was obvious. We could have chosen anything else. We could have chosen class as part of that. We could have chosen migrant status as part of that. But we chose race because it was obvious and there was already a data set around it that we could build on. And that's one point, that activism has to leverage something. We're always standing on the shoulders of some previous giants with this stuff. But I was going into a lot of organizations, the Wildlife Trusts included, National Trust, RSPB, really, really important institutions, and saying, what kind of change do you want and how are you going to do it? And it felt like people were talking around the issue. And I said, well, if you had a data set that I could show to you as a mirror and say, this is what your sector currently feels, looks like, and this is where the opportunities are, and this is where the risk of continuing to be like that are going to be, and then would that allow you to change how you're doing things? And obviously the answer is always yes, because the data set doesn't exist. People can hide away behind, oh, well, sure, it's a hypothetical question. And I think we are now 3-4 years into it, and what it has done is it's kind of rooted out hiding spaces. You know, it's kind of said, look, this is the situation as it is. What more data do you need to act? And I think often, you know, like, to kind of finish my point on it, what I've realized is that data can also be dangerous, that organizations can use data as a brake rather than as a compass or as an accelerator, right? Oh, okay, you've told us what we need to know, now let's analyze it. And then you're 2-3 years down the line with people not wanting to do stuff. And actually, we know that radical action is about courage. And so what I'm hoping for right now in this moment in the cycle of the race report is that we start to see more courage from leaders, rather than, thank you, we're just going to close the door now and look at what you've given us and come back to you in a few years.
Yeah. I think I agree, Manu, and that's the issue. Like you're saying, it's about that radical change in activism throughout the history. If you're doing activism, you have to be ready to lose something. That's the unfortunate part about activism and fighting for what you believe in. There are people that do it because they have no choice. We talk about apartheid, we talk about segregation, we talk about all these different spaces in history where people just they didn't have a choice but to be activists. Otherwise, they would have been stuck in that position. But actually always recognizing the bravery within those actions as well, because if you're ready to lose something because of your passion for social justice, that's when a lot of people, you get a lot of allies that are authentic as well, and ready to be like when you do the race report and people are telling you, we're doing really bad, can you help us? What are the things that what are the things that you can do to help us to like get, it's not just about getting the numbers right as well, right? It's about also making sure that when you get people in, people are going to feel safe, people are going to feel like they belong, and people are going to feel like, yeah, they've done the work, not just for the tokenistic element of getting people to come in, but because this is genuinely a change that they want to make. So when we're talking about like activism, we're talking about change making, it's about getting ready to, are you going to lose a few donors because you've made a statement about Gaza? Are you going to lose a few of this? Are you willing to really make those hard-hitting decisions because they go with your values? Or are you ready to just keep quiet about it because you're scared to lose something? And I guess if you're with that mindset of, if I lose it, I lose it, but as long as I'm doing something that's right, that's when we get those very good active and change-making ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about embodying it, isn't it? Activism is something that I feel is embodied, and it's personal. And as soon as you can, you know, embody it and feel into those values and feel into that justice space, everything else becomes a lot easier. You know, you're no longer feeling torn between, well, the party line with the organization or whatever is this, and yet we're trying to, you know, straddle this tightrope. Actually, it's just a case of, you know, it goes back to the title of the parliament, right? You know, is nature for all? If we care about everyone and everything, then surely that, you know, compass of care can direct every movement. Yeah, I'm really interested in that. And I think, you know, you started to touch on some global issues there as well, Naftal. Do you feel that global issues aren't kind of taken into account so much, you know, in what you've seen so far from the sector?
You know what, it's a difficult one. It is, because I think a lot of ENGOs, when you talk about the global side of it, it's like, okay, but we're more about nature, we not really shouldn't be focusing on like what's happening. But then you also recognize that it is about nature because this spaces are going through ecocide. For example, I was reading in Gaza, I think like 50% of the trees have been destroyed through what's going on right now. You get water pollution. You get you people like I was talking to one of my friends. I was saying that imagine you're waking up in the morning and everything that was green around you is gone. Everything is turned into rubble. That bird that you used to see fly past your house, it doesn't exist anymore. And I think if we are not calling out these things and talking about how the nature in itself is in danger. There's a lot of endangered animals, endangered trees, etc. that are going on, and people not having. We talk about having access here, but people are losing access where they are to their own backyards and their own nature. So if we're not speaking out against what's happening, I think we kind of getting complacent. And what we need to do is to make sure that we are the voice of those whose voices have been taken away. We are very much in a privileged state because we can speak out. We can say this is wrong, it needs to stop. But a lot of people are not in that position. And I believe part of humanity is to ensure that you can be the voice of those that are no longer able to speak up for themselves. That is what humanity is, being able to speak for one another. Because if I was in the same position, I would like the Manus and the Rias of the world to be speaking up for me. But if they silence, then yeah, it feels like a very alone, a lonely place. So I do agree that we do need to speak out. And I know a lot of people are afraid of the backlash. Sorry, when I speak a lot, my Zim accent just starts creeping out. But we a lot of spaces are a lot of companies might be afraid of losing, but there's also much to gain because on that side, you're gaining humanity, you're gaining and helping to speak out against something rather than just keeping quiet. You lose face, you lose your values, you lose what you believe in if you're not speaking out. But if you speak up for somebody, you gain a lot more. And I'm a strong believer of that as well. I don't know if Manu has something to to add into that as well.
I mean, firstly to say, yeah, so much of what you've said is, yeah, you've kind of eloquently put the point across in a way that probably I couldn't have. But I think freedom ultimately, its primary function is not to bask in it. I think its primary function is ultimately to be able to free somebody else. If we start to look at freedom as a gift to be passed on, then where do we start with that? I think a lot of institutional organizations, I have a lot of empathy for organizations saying, well, this is our scope of inquiry, this is our scope of practice, and we can't really deal with everything all the time, all at once, right? I think there's something to be said for that. I think there's something to be said for focus and something to be said for directing your, a bit of, a lot of strategy is not really about what you do, it's about what you don't do, right? It's and seeing that through a clear lens is what leadership is about in many ways. But the thing is, we're already failing. A lot of environmental action is already failing to meet the needs of people here, right now, in our cities, in this landscape, right? I could walk five minutes down the road to, an old estate which used to be a mining neighborhood, and half the kids there have never been to a woodland, right? Have never been given access to it. And that is a diverse mix of kids: white working class kids, black working class kids, Bangladeshi working class kids. And so I think the challenge is to think globally, but for a lot of institutions, what are you doing locally? if you don't have the practice, if you haven't been able to even rehearse what taking into account the needs of those who are most underprivileged, those who are most in need of the services that you say you're providing, I'm almost shudder with fear when I think, oh, okay, these guys are then going to go off and take into consideration global issues, right? Like, let's start here. Let's start at home. I think it's a global issue, but if we can't do it at home, we can't do it abroad.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember, Naftal, because you're so much engaged in community spaces at the moment, you've had some brilliant initiatives that you've started up with the wildlife trusts, you know, from our previous conversations. I wonder if you could just, you know, speak to some of those, you know, in terms of communities feeling very much that they are unheard, they're not part of, you know, that they're not part of, you know, these conversations, nature, the landscape, they're very much excluded, and the lack of trust. And you've had some really incredible ways of kind of really reaching out and making a difference, and at the same time transforming the wildlife trusts somewhat in the work that you've been doing. Can you speak to that a little?
Yes. So obviously I've been at the Wildlife Trust for over a year now. I feel like I'm quite a seasoned veteran. But yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that we've faced, and one of the biggest challenges that I think we're doing well in, is reimagining what is nature, right? Because I think in a lot of spaces we already have our mindset of this is nature, this is what nature should look like. But recognizing that everybody views nature in a different way, and everybody's lens is so much different. Me and Manu can look at a tree right now, and both of us could come up with two different conclusions. Does that make him right? Does that make me right? Does that make me wrong? No, both of us are allowed to see the world the way that we're supposed to. So part of our communities and campaigning is to ensure that we're empowering people to see nature and spend nature with how they would like to spend nature. So instead of like deep diving and going into a community and say, you need to start looking at nature this way, this tree is supposed to be representing this, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, we're going into the spaces. This is your space. This is your community. You know this community better than us. We're just going to give you the tools that we have to help you with your campaigning, or to help you with how you look after a certain area. We're just here as a tool to help, and ensuring that it's not just we're coming here and leaving, but we're also working with those communities through our different campaigns. So right now, one of the big things that we're doing is kind of challenging the planning bill, because we're recognizing that this planning bill doesn't really benefit the working class. It doesn't really benefit the people that they say they will benefit. Recognizing that a lot of people are going to lose a lot of their green space that they're fortunate to have, but they barely have it anyways. So all these little things such as allotments that have now been taken over and removed so they can build houses. Some of the small little parks that to me, I can walk every day. It doesn't really matter to me, but for somebody else, that's the space that they go into to for their mental health, etc. So what we've done is we have been writing letters to the MPs. More than 13,000 people applied so that we can help to respond to the formal consultation for the biodiversity net gain. So yeah, we're doing so much, but I think one of the things that we recognize is going back to the aspect of helping people with their voice, gain their voice. Because I think a lot of people have lost trust in their MPs. A lot of people have lost trust in a lot of things that the government has been doing in terms of green space. So one of the things that we're doing is kind of just trying to push back against that in any way that we can. So So if you need to speak to your MPs, we'll help you write a letter to respond to your MPs. We recognize that this is not huge, but it's a step towards the activism. It's something that we can use to build and to help support. So that's kind of giving you a little gist. I could talk for hours about some of the work that we do, but
I'm
that's
sure
kind of
there's
some
lots
of the important things that we're doing now.
That's great. I mean, it's about, sometimes it's just about taking those steps to overcoming those barriers and supporting people meaningfully to, as you say, reach out to an MP and to be able to speak in their own voice and communicate. And also understanding the policy landscape, which is so fast-paced, incredibly complex, shifting and changing all of the time, and must feel very dangerous and potentially quite useless to many people, you know,
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
quite frank. And so, yeah, I think there's this role of organisations to support with campaigning. And I would say, you know, speaking, you know, within my department in the university as well, you know, which is linked to social and politics, it's also about, you know, exercising our privilege and our responsibility also to, you know, support with that engagement work. So I think it does tie in together, and it's just about seeing it as a core function of our responsibility, really, from
yeah.
where we are. Mm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the main lessons that we've learned is to listen more than talking. A lot of communities have been spoken to, not listened to. A lot of communities have had things told to them that have not happened. They've told them, if you do this, you're gonna get this, and none of it's happened. So one of our core works is also rebuilding that trust within communities, letting them know that we're not just all talk, but we are doing ABCD to make sure that we can help you as much as we can. Because a lot of people with power, they like to disappoint those without. So what we're trying to do right now is kind of have that power change to say that we don't hold all the power in decision making. We want you to come along and also have access to that power in making decision making within your communities as well. So that's the gist of the Wildlife Trust.
Thank you. And Manu, I just want to ask a final question, really, and then we'll open to the floor. But what would be the asks to the organisations present today, including the university, including the National Trust and others, like in terms of the activism and change making that you want to see, like what can be done now, what needs to be done?
Do we have like 2 hours for this bit? uh, Look, I think organizations have a responsibility to be really clear about what their values are and to communicate them in a way that is engaging and empowering to the people for whom those values stand, right? I think often it can feel very wishy-washy. It can feel very opportunistic. You know, 2020, you had the BLM stuff going on, and suddenly everybody wants to have a black square on their LinkedIn profile, right? And there's no action that follows. And so, although there's a moment of uplift and levity, it very quickly crashes down because those values were not communicated properly and they weren't real. And I think to get that right, you need good leadership, you know, be able to challenge leaders to take risks. And I was reading a wonderful study about the 2008 financial crisis as to the organizations that came out the other side of that bigger and more resilient. And the research showed that the one biggest factor that separated those who ultimately failed and those who succeeded was an appetite for risk, right? And you might think that's super ironic because the 2008 crisis was caused by too much risk. But actually, leaders that take calculated risk and, you know, back to that, you know, wonderful C word we had earlier, courage, right, are courageous and are willing to give their teams opportunity to experiment and say, okay, what happens if 0.5% of our budget goes towards this particular thing that we haven't tried before? I think that's where I want to see organizations moving to. And not waiting for the data or the information to come at you, because we live in a world where truth and accountability are kind of historical artifacts now. They belong in the Ice Age, if you look at the way our politicians act most of the time. And we have to dig into our own truth and feel like we can share accountability. And that's where the activism really is, because we have to kind of say, are we going to be part of the status quo where we hide behind the words of politicians that are saying we're not responsible for everything, we're not responsible for everybody, or are we actually going to keep moving in the direction that we think is going to help our organizations and our communities? And just look to the future. Think about the future. Is the future going to be the same people visiting your sites, contributing to your research? And is that enough? What is the value add if you open those doors slightly wider and you empower and inform and engage?
Yeah, thank you so much. And it also speaks to the fact that in leadership positions, people like us aren't represented. We never are. I think it's less than 1% in the environmental sector. But if money is put towards supporting, Black and brown people in particular, who come with these strong ethics and values and experience moving forward, who do connect with communities and understand the policy sphere as well, this is where, you can start taking forward ideas for risk, for change making, in terms of cementing those values and making them a reality instead of just performative action. So great. Thank you both. So I'll just move now to the Q&A and see what questions are here. I'll just start with the top question. Anonymous says, how did you persuade the parents and kids you mentioned you experienced as a teacher getting into nature was worth the effort? Thanks.
I bribed them all, really. Took out a loan and paid them all a favor. No, that's not what happened. We take out through NYCE, we take out about 300 kids every year out into spaces, sometimes very close to them, sometimes far afield. And I think a lot of it has to do with realizing that every single human being on this planet, in the city where we are in Bristol, is aspirational towards something, right? They are trying and striving for something in their life, and they might face a lot of barriers towards that discourage them. But ultimately, we've tried to figure out what those aspirations are. And Naftal, you said earlier that it's about listening more than talking, and we've tried to empower the youth workers that we've got to really understand what these young people want to do with their lives, but what are they into? You suddenly come up against the realization that most of them don't want to be sitting around scrolling on their phone all day. That most of them realize that it's unhealthy to be doing that. That they've seen the outdoors and a beach and whatever on TV, but never really put themselves in it. Some of them might have gone on a holiday to Spain because that's what their parents could afford. And an EasyJet is cheaper than Great Western Rail. Big headline. But like for a lot of them, it's, have they managed to trust us in the process in which we are going to them and asking them the questions about what are you into? What do you want to do? So we always start in the city. We've got a music studio that we run with the young people. They come in, they rap on the mic and produce their, and for them, a lot of them, it's like, this has nothing to do with nature, but what we're building with them is a sense of trust and a sense of respect and dignity for them, that what you're into is also important. And at some point in the spring, we pull the rug out and go, let's go out to the mountains. really. That's what happens. And then and they want to come with us because they like our youth workers, and they know that we can relate and they can trust us to do that with them.
Thank you. There's a question here, it's a bit further down, and it's, I guess, to both of you. You've mentioned courage and bravery. How can this be cultivated and kept alive in the face of so many environmental crises and injustices?
I'll hand over to Naftal for that one.
I was literally about to hand over to Manu. You know what? It's like going back to the aspect that we've been speaking about, not being afraid to lose. That's the courage part, because I think when it comes to, it doesn't have to be something major, just putting out a statement to say we recognize that this is happening A, B, C, D in these spaces. Obviously we disagree with all those things. What we're asking for is not a massive letter or something huge that makes a big difference or what. We're just starting at the smallest. That's what organizations can do. Just like putting out a statement, like even a tweet or something, write something and just show your allyship to this communities that are going through different things. And I think when people do look at your organization, they'll see that you've got courage, and they'll see that you are against ecocide, genocide that's going on in different places. And I think it's about having just putting out something and just saying something that that's the smallest little grain of advice I can give.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to come in on that, and then I think, we might have to wrap up. But I read the question also in another way. Courage and bravery, in terms of like our own intrinsic motivation, like what drives us forward. Like this work is exhausting. Everything that we're living through is incredibly exhausting. And one of the things that, I really take forward is when I feel burnt out and I'm up against it, it's giving yourself time to pause and kind of think who your people are and to regroup in community. And, there's another question here, what can people not in oppressed groups do to help? Well, I think we touched on that a lot anyway in our discussion. But one of the things that I feel that people can do is recognize the struggle and that it is not proportionately carried by all of us equally. And so some of us sometimes are going to need more support, and that we don't know what we're all dealing with and all the extra that some of us are trying to carry. So I think it's just taking forward that compassion, the care, the kindness, that kind of community support, being able to kind of have spaces, like even thinking about the care room today, just spaces that we can come together and just breathe and, say the thing without code switching, without having to toe any party line. Like, to me, that's incredibly valuable. So, and again, that really helps in fostering understanding between people so that we can all feel like we're understood and that we're on this journey together. So
are you wrapping up, Ria, or
I would like you to wrap up with what you've got in your mind, that I can see the seed there.
Yeah, no, I've been really inspired by what both of you have just said there. I think we are, organizations and human beings and communities are in a story that they choose to inhabit, or that is forced upon them, right? We are walking through a narrative, and I think a lot of courage comes from having a vision of where that story is going. I think when you see, as much as I hate militarism and all the wars going on in the world, the reason soldiers or Navy people or whoever end up doing these ridiculously brave things in the face of total annihilation is because they've inhabited a story that says, if we get this right, we're going to come out more free than we were. but they've also done something which is they have a solidarity with a movement. They have a solidarity with each other, and so they cease to become this individual that is simply acting on their own behalf, and move towards a place where they're seeing a collective. And I think those two things for me are so important with courage, that you have to see who you're working with, and what, are those people on your side. And one of the problems of our post-2020 lives is that we suddenly became divided along quite arbitrary lines, and that's been taken advantage of by big political forces to say we are different. And yes, we are different, but that's the beautiful thing about being alive, right? That we can sort of like bask in our differences. And so finding solidarity with people across racial lines, across gender lines, across migration lines, and then saying, what's our vision? Where do we actually want to get to? And to me, that's real leadership.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you. I would love to continue this conversation, and there's so much appreciation for you as well in the comments. So thanks so much for your time today, and I'll meet you now backstage, and I'll hand over to Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.